Before the moon became a symbol of love or longing or quiet beauty, it was something far older and far more unsettling. It was the first light of night, not warm, not forgiving, but pale and distant. A light that did not chase darkness away, but revealed just enough of it to remind early humans how little they truly controlled. In the long prehistory of the human mind, night was not a neutral absence of day. It was a territory, a realm where vision failed, where sound traveled farther than sight, and where the rules of survival changed without warning. Fire could push back the dark, but only so far. Beyond the circle of flame, the world dissolved into suggestion, rustling leaves, breaking twigs, eyes that might or might not be watching. And above it all, slowly rising, came the moon. It did not blaze like the sun. It emerged quietly, without heat or sound, climbing the sky as if summoned by no one. To early observers, this ascent was not mechanical. It felt deliberate. The moon appeared when humans were most vulnerable, when hunting ceased, when children slept, when guards strained their ears for danger. It watched over the hours when teeth and claws ruled, and when the thin membrane of safety could be torn apart in an instant. Archaeology cannot tell us exactly when humans first looked up and felt unease. But the evidence of lunar awareness is ancient beyond measurement. Bone markings from Paleolithic Europe show careful notches believed to track lunar cycles. Long before agriculture, before cities, before writing, the moon was already being counted. Not admired, counted, measured, watched with the seriousness one reserves for a force that matters. This was not astronomy. It was survival. The moon changed shape. It vanished and returned. It grew, bled away, and was reborn. No predator on Earth behaved this way. No fire, no storm, no river followed such a visible rhythm. The moon suggested that the sky itself was alive, not chaotic, but purposeful. And purpose, to an early human mind, implied awareness. When clouds swallowed the moon, darkness thickened. When it returned, shadows sharpened. The same landscape became unfamiliar under its glow. Rocks resembled crouched figures. Trees stretched into towering silhouettes. Movement became ambiguous. Was it wind or something closer? Moonlight did not comfort. Sharpened fear. In this light, humanity's oldest enemies hunted. Big cats, wolves, hyenas. Creatures whose eyes reflected the moon's glow, revealing life where humans wished there was none. The moon did not hide predators. It announced them. And yet it did not protect either. It offered vision without safety, awareness without control. Cruel gift. This is where reverence begins. Not in beauty, but in helplessness. To ancient minds, anything that governed fear deserved respect. And the moon governed fear with perfect consistency. It returned whether humans wanted it or not. It rose over grief and hunger alike. It witnessed birth, blood, death, and decay with the same indifferent calm. It did not intervene. It observed. Across early cultures, this observation became personified. The moon was not imagined as a blazing god of justice or war, but as something quieter. A watcher, a measurer, a keeper of time. In many early myth systems, the sun ruled life while the moon ruled passage. Not creation but transition. Not warmth but endurance. Anthropologically, this distinction matters. The moon presided over thresholds, nightfall, menstruation, tides, sleep, death. All things that involved loss of control. All things humans experienced but could not command. Where the sun promised labor and order, the moon promised uncertainty. And uncertainty breeds stories. In prehistoric camps, when the fire burned low and the moon climbed high, language softened, voices dropped, warnings were repeated, children were pulled closer. The night demanded caution, and the moon signaled its arrival. Over time, this association fused into belief. The moon did not merely accompany danger. It summoned it. Psychologically, the human brain is wired to seek agency behind threat. Random danger is unbearable. A watching sky is easier to accept than a meaningless one. And so the moon became intentional. Chose when to rise. Chose when to hide. It chose when darkness would feel heavier than usual. This belief did not arise from ignorance. It arose from pattern recognition, one of humanity's greatest strengths and most dangerous instincts. The moon was predictable, yes. But what happened beneath it was not. And the mind stitched the two together. Long before gods were carved into stone, the moon occupied an uneasy position in human consciousness. It was not benevolent, but it was necessary. It governed time when no other clock existed. It regulated migration, hunting cycles, and early rituals. To ignore it was to risk starvation. To trust it was to risk terror. This duality, dependence and dread, lies at the heart of lunar fear. The moon's light was also unlike any other. It stripped color from the world. Reds faded to gray. Blood darkened. Faces became masks. In moonlight, even familiar people looked altered. Hollow-eyed, spectral, half unknown. Identity itself felt unstable. A friend glimpsed at the edge of vision could become a stranger. The mind filled gaps with imagination. Here, in this altered perception, myth took root. The moon did not create monsters. It created the conditions in which humans imagined them. It blurred certainty. It invited projection. In moonlight, the world felt thin, as if something could step through at any moment. And perhaps that was the deepest fear of all. Not what lurked outside the firelight, but what lurked within the human mind when boundaries dissolved. The moon ruled that dissolution. It governed the hours when dreams bled into waking, when memory distorted, when fear spoke louder than reason. To fear the moon was to fear vulnerability itself. Even today, traces of this ancient unease linger in language. We speak of lunacy, of madness waxing and waning. We describe sleepless nights as moonlit, not starlit. We instinctively lower our voices under its glow, as if the sky might still be listening. Because somewhere, deep in the inherited memory of our species, the moon remains what it was at the beginning. Not a symbol of romance, but a reminder. A reminder that darkness is not empty. That light does not always protect. That being seen does not mean being safe. The first humans learned this lesson without words, without myth, without gods. They learned it sitting beside fire, watching shadows stretch and contract as the moon climbed higher. They learned it listening to the night move beyond the edge of sight. They learned it by surviving. And so the moon endured, silent, constant, indifferent, the first ruler of the night, and the oldest witness to human fear. It watched us learn to name the darkness. And it has never stopped watching since. In the long darkness before cities had names, the sky was not an empty ceiling. It was a presence, heavy, intent. When the fires dimmed and the land fell silent, early humans lifted their eyes and felt something lift its gaze in return. The heavens were not distant abstractions. They were intimate and immediate, pressing down upon fragile lives with quiet authority. And among all the lights above, one returned again and again, unchanged, unblinking, the moon. Its rise was never hurried. It did not blaze like the sun or scatter like the stars. It emerged slowly, deliberately, as if aware of being watched. In this rhythm, ancient people sensed meaning. A pattern too precise to be accidental. A watcher who never slept while they did. The moon did not simply illuminate the night. It claimed it. Long before telescopes stripped the sky of mystery, the cosmos was a map of intention. The moon's phases carved time itself into visible shapes. Waxing, full, waning, then born again. To the early human mind this was not motion, it was behavior. The moon appeared to act, to choose when to arrive and when to withdraw. And in a world where survival depended on recognizing intention, predator or prey, ally or threat, such behavior could not be ignored. Anthropologists find echoes of this belief in the oldest artifacts we possess. Bone markings from Paleolithic Europe, etched with repeating notches, likely tracked lunar cycles. These were not idle scratches. They were calendars of survival, carved by hands that knew hunger followed patterns, and patterns were governed by the sky. The moon became time made visible, a celestial measure against which life was counted. Sleep bent to it. Hunting bent to it. Migration bent to it. When the moon was full, the night was exposed. Shadows retreated, and so did ambush. Predators moved differently. Humans did too. When the moon vanished, darkness thickened, and fear regained its footing. In this way, the moon dictated behavior without ever touching the earth. It ruled by presence alone. To ancient societies, this authority felt personal. The moon did not simply exist, it observed. Its cold light revealed movements that daylight forgave. Lovers concealed by darkness were suddenly visible. Thieves paused. Animals froze. The full moon erased anonymity, and in doing so, it became associated with judgment. A silent witness hovering above human error. In Mesopotamia, the moon god Sin, also called Nana, was not a distant deity of abstraction. He was the keeper of wisdom and time, the father of the sun, older and calmer than the day. His temple rose high at Uar, not merely to honor him, but to be closer to his gaze. The priests believed the moon measured not only days, but moral order. Oaths sworn under moonlight carried weight because the sky itself had heard them. Across the world, similar beliefs formed independently. In ancient China, the moon was bound to balance and watchfulness, a symbol of cosmic harmony that observed human affairs from above. In Mesoamerica, lunar deities governed cycles of fertility and sacrifice, their phases echoing the fragile rhythm between life and death. These cultures did not borrow from one another, yet they arrived at the same conclusion. The moon was aware. This belief did not arise from ignorance. It arose from intimacy. Ancient humans lived beneath the open sky, exposed to its movements every night of their lives. The heavens were not hidden by stone ceilings or electric light. They loomed. When storms gathered, the sky spoke. When eclipses arrived, it warned. And when the moon returned reliably and endlessly, it suggested memory. Memory implies mind. The psychological weight of this cannot be overstated. To believe you are watched is to behave differently. It instills restraint, caution, reverence. It also breeds anxiety. Under the moon's gaze, nothing was truly private. Grief unfolded beneath it. Births occurred under it. Deaths were buried by its light. The moon became present at every threshold of human existence, an observer that never intervened, never comforted, only watched. Over time, this watchfulness seeped inward. The human mind began to mirror the sky it feared. If the moon could see us, perhaps it could also touch us. Influence followed observation. The idea that the moon measured sleep and hunger was not metaphorical. It was experiential. People noticed restlessness on bright nights. They observed animals acting strangely. They felt their own thoughts drift, sharpen, or unravel beneath its glow. Language preserved this belief. The Latin word lunaticus did not emerge from superstition alone, but from a long association between lunar cycles and altered states of mind. The moon became linked to dreams, visions, and instability, not because it caused them, but because it revealed them. Under moonlight, the inner world felt closer to the surface. Anthropology suggests this fear of observation served a function. Societies governed by unseen watchers, whether gods, ancestors, or celestial bodies, policed themselves. The moon became an early moral architecture, a sky-bound reminder that actions carried consequence beyond the immediate. Even alone, one was not unseen. Yet there was comfort here too. To be watched is not only to be judged, it is also to be remembered. In a world where death came quickly and records did not exist, the moon's endless return suggested continuity. It had seen generations pass and still returned. It had watched ancestors hunt, starve, pray, and vanish. And it watched their children do the same. The moon became a witness to humanity itself. As civilizations grew and architecture rose, this belief did not fade. It adapted. Temples aligned with lunar events. Festivals followed its cycle. Myths softened its gaze into gods and goddesses, giving it faces and names that humans could address. But beneath the ritual, the old feeling remained. the sense of being observed by something vast and patient. Even today that feeling lingers. We speak of moonlit nights as exposed, of secrets revealed in silver light. We feel unease standing alone beneath a full moon, not because we fear it, but because part of us remembers when the sky was not empty. When the night looked back. The moon no longer measures our hunger or governs our sleep by necessity. Science has given it mass, orbit explanation. But explanation does not erase instinct. When its pale face rises, ancient recognition stirs. A memory older than language, older than cities. The sky once watched us grow into ourselves. And in the quiet glow of the moon it still feels, just for a moment, that it remembers. In the long silence before medicine learned the language of the mind, madness had no shelter. It wandered openly through villages and hearth-lit rooms, wearing faces that were once familiar. And above it all, pale and distant, the moon kept its vigil, unchanging, unblinking, returning again and again to witness what daylight could not explain. Night was not merely the absence of sun. It was a transformation of the world itself. Shapes softened, borders dissolved, and the mind, untethered from labor and light, became vulnerable to wandering thoughts. Under the silver disk of the moon, people spoke differently, slept differently, dreamed more intensely. The ancients noticed these changes not as coincidence, but as cause. The moon was not passive in their cosmology. It acted, pulled, it influenced. If it could command the tides, why not the blood? If oceans rose and fell at its insistence, surely the human body, so full of water, so fragile, must also obey its invisible summons. Madness, then, was not an illness. It was a visitation. The word itself betrays the belief. Lunacy, drawn from luna, the Latin moon. A condition not born from within, but imposed from above. When reason fractured, when a neighbor spoke in spirals or wandered naked into fields, the cause was sought not in the mind but in the sky. The moon had touched them. The moon had taken something. Across ancient Greece, physicians like Hippocrates quietly challenged this idea, suggesting that madness had earthly origins, imbalances of humors, disturbances of the body. Yet even he could not fully escape lunar gravity. His writings acknowledge that seizures and mental disturbances appeared to worsen beneath the full moon. Observation, not superstition, kept the belief alive. In Rome, the moon was both goddess and threat. Luna guided time and agriculture, but she also governed instability. Those who suffered fits or hallucinations were said to be ment captus, taken in the mind, during certain phases of her cycle. The heavens were not abstract. They were intimate, personal, and deeply involved in human suffering. Medieval Europe inherited these ideas with reverence and fear. In monasteries and market towns, erratic behavior was catalogued not by symptom but by timing. Was the afflicted restless at the full moon? Did their agitation swell as the moon grew round and luminous? Patterns were drawn, calendars marked, prayers intensified. The moon's brightness, paradoxically, was itself suspect. It illuminated the night too well, casting sharp shadows where ambiguity lived. Under its glow, familiar paths became strange, and the ordinary slipped toward the uncanny. It was believed that moonlight entered through the eyes, seeping into the mind like a toxin. Too much exposure could unravel the self. This fear was not confined to Europe. In ancient China, lunar imbalance was thought to disrupt qi, the vital energy flowing through the body. A disturbed mind reflected a disturbed harmony between heaven and earth. The moon, a symbol of balance and reunion, became instead a mirror of fracture when its influence went unchecked. In Islamic scholarship, physicians debated the moon's role with careful nuance. While rejecting superstition, many acknowledged that environmental rhythms, including lunar cycles, could affect sleep, mood, and cognition. The moon was no demon, but it was not irrelevant. It altered the night, and the night altered the mind. For communities without science, explanation was an act of mercy. To say the moon caused madness was to absolve the afflicted of guilt. They were not sinful. They were not evil. They were acted upon. Possessed not by demons alone, but by the very structure of the cosmos. The sky itself had reached down and shaken them. Yet mercy carried fear. If madness came from the moon, then no one was safe. Every cycle threatened transformation. Every full moon was a test of restraint. People shuttered windows, drew curtains, and warned children not to sleep beneath moonlight. Protection was ritualized. Amulets, herbs, whispered prayers meant to anchor the mind to the earth. Those who suffered repeatedly became cautionary figures. Not monsters but omens. Their episodes served as reminders of how thin the boundary was between order and collapse. Civilization depended on control. Of land, of body, of thought. Madness was the proof that such control was fragile. In time, these fears began to take shape in story. The madman who wandered at night became a familiar silhouette. He spoke to the moon, answered voices others could not hear. His humanity blurred. And gradually, the idea emerged that madness was not only influence, but invitation, that something within the human soul responded willingly to lunar pull. This was the seed of a darker belief. That beneath reason lived something older. Something animal. The moon did not create madness. It revealed it. It peeled back the layers of learned behavior and exposed the raw instincts beneath. Hunger, rage, desire. The things civilization trained the daylight mind to bury. To go mad under the moon was to remember too much. Even as centuries passed and asylums replaced shrines, the belief endured. Early modern doctors recorded spikes in agitation during full moons. Courts noted increased violence. Whether coincidence or confirmation bias mattered little. The pattern felt real. The moon remained suspect. It lingers even now, quietly embedded in language and law. Emergency rooms prepare for the full moon. Nurses whisper of restless nights. Juries hear the word temporary insanity echo with ancient undertones. We have traded goddesses for graphs, but the unease persists. Because the fear was never truly about the moon. It was about the mind's vulnerability. About the terror of losing oneself without warning. About watching a loved one drift into confusion and not knowing how to call them back. The moon simply gave that fear a shape. A steady, distant witness that returned on schedule, indifferent to human pleading. Under its light, our ancestors saw reflected their deepest anxiety. That reason is not permanent. That identity is not fixed. That beneath the careful architecture of thought lies a wilderness, waiting for the night to grow long enough. And so the moon continues its ancient orbit, unchanged by belief or disbelief. It rises over hospitals and highways as it once rose over forests and stone huts. It no longer stands accused in courts of medicine, but it still watches. And somewhere, deep within the human mind, something still stirs when the night grows bright. In the long memory of the human species, the moon was never distant. It was not a silent stone drifting through space, but a presence, an invisible hand that reached down into water, blood and bone. Long before numbers and instruments traced its orbit, people felt its influence without understanding its shape. They watched the seas rise and retreat in obedient rhythm, and they wondered what else might be pulled by that same unseen force. On the world's first coastlines, where early communities built their lives at the edge of water, the moon revealed its power openly. Tides advanced and withdrew with solemn predictability, flooding familiar paths, exposing hidden ground, erasing yesterday's certainty. No human command could stop it. No prayer could delay it. The moon did not threaten, it demonstrated. It showed that the earth itself bent to a celestial will, and that gravity, though unnamed, was absolute. From this observation grew a dangerous thought. If the oceans answered the moon, perhaps the human body did as well. Ancient people understood themselves through fluid. Blood was life made visible, carried heat, spirit, and memory. When blood left the body unexpectedly, something was wrong. An imbalance, a wound, a punishment. And so when women bled without injury, in cycles that echoed the moon's own waxing and waning, the connection felt undeniable. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, menstruation became lunar by nature. The body, it seemed, was keeping time with the sky. This alignment was not comforting. It suggested that human flesh was not autonomous, that something vast and distant could reach into the most intimate processes of life. Menstruation became surrounded by taboo not simply because it was misunderstood, but because it was understood too well, as evidence of surrender. The body was not fully one's own. It was listening to something else. In Mesopotamia, the moon god Sin governed time, fertility, and wisdom, but also madness. In ancient Greece, Selene's pale light was both nurturing and destabilizing, capable of softening reason and stirring unrest. Roman writers noted that wounds bled more freely beneath the full moon, that illness worsened, that sleep fractured into restless fragments. These were not isolated superstitions. They were patterns people believed they had witnessed again and again. Fever, in particular, seemed to follow lunar law. Ancient physicians observed that certain illnesses peaked at full or new moons, when the sky's balance shifted. Without germ theory or thermometers, disease was read through rhythm. A fever that flared at night, that rose and fell in cycles, felt less like an internal malfunction and more like an external influence. The moon was not blamed out of ignorance alone, but because it offered coherence in a world where suffering otherwise had none. Hippocrates himself warned against performing surgeries under a full moon, believing the body's fluids were dangerously unsettled. This was medicine shaped by observation, not fantasy. Blood flowed. Swelling worsened. Recovery faltered. The moon, once again, appeared to govern what humans could not control. And then there was madness. The word lunatic survives as a fossil of this belief, a linguistic scar left by centuries of fear. Erratic behavior, seizures, sudden violence, catatonia. These states were not understood as neurological or psychological conditions. They were interpreted as moments when the moon's grip tightened, when reason loosened its hold and something older surfaced. The human mind, like the sea, was thought to surge under lunar command. In this worldview, sanity was fragile. It was not a stable trait but a temporary alignment, easily disturbed by celestial forces. To be human was to exist in a state of constant negotiation, with hunger, with illness, with the night sky itself. Control was an illusion, and the moon exposed it. Anthropologically, this fear speaks to something deeper than superstition. Early societies lived without insulation from nature's rhythms. Sleep followed darkness. Work followed daylight. Bodies aged, bled, and broke without explanation. The moon offered a visible pattern in an otherwise chaotic universe. It gave people a structure on which to hang their anxieties. If suffering had a cause, even a distant one, it could be anticipated, ritualized, perhaps softened. Yet this explanation came at a cost. If the moon ruled the body, then the body could betray its owner at any moment. Illness was not merely misfortune, it was submission. A fever was no longer just heat, but evidence of influence. Menstruation was not merely biology, but a sign of alignment with a cosmic force that men, in particular, could not access or control. Fear then turned inward. The body became suspect. This suspicion shaped social boundaries. Those whose bodies behaved unpredictably, the sick, the epileptic, the mentally ill, were seen as closer to the moon's reach. They existed nearer the edge where human order dissolved into something untamed. In some cultures they were revered. In others isolated. Always they were watched. Over time, religion absorbed these fears and reframed them. Lunar cycles became sacred calendars. Holy days followed the moon's phases. Fasting, fertility rites, and purification rituals aligned with its light and absence. The moon was no longer merely a threat. It was a regulator, a divine clock. But even sanctified, it remained dangerous. Sacred things often are. Modern science would eventually name gravity, hormones, circadian rhythms. It would explain tides mathematically and menstruation biologically. Yet the old unease never fully disappeared. Emergency rooms still report surges during full moons. Nurses still whisper about lunar nights. Language still carries the echo of ancient dread. Because beneath the facts lies a truth that statistics cannot erase. The human body is not entirely obedient to will. Changes. It bleeds. Falters. And for most of our history, the moon was the only visible witness to these changes. Silent, constant, and impossibly distant. In its glow, our ancestors saw proof that control was temporary. That flesh listened to forces beyond intention. That to be human was to be pulled, subtly and endlessly, by things unseen. The moon did not need to touch the body to command it. It only needed to rise. And as it always has, pale and patient, it reminded those who watched from below that even blood remembers the sky. In the long memory of humanity, there was a time before monsters wore claws and curses. Before the howl was supernatural, it was simply human, raw, desperate, and unanswered. Across forests darkened by centuries and frontiers where stone walls thinned into trees, a figure began to take shape. Not born of fantasy but of observation. A man who stepped too far from the firelight, and did not return unchanged. Civilization, in its earliest form, was fragile. It existed in clusters of warmth and ritual, bounded by rules that separated the living from the dead, the human from the animal. Beyond these boundaries lay the wild, an ancient breathing presence that did not obey language or law. Hunting grounds, forests, mountains, and winter plains were not empty spaces. They were realms where survival demanded transformation. And sometimes, transformation did not end when the hunt was over. Anthropologists have long noted that the line between hunter and hunted was once perilously thin. To pursue animals, humans learned to think like them, to track silently, to kill efficiently, to suppress hesitation. This skill was necessary but feared. For when a man learned to move like a wolf, to see through darkness, to spill blood without ceremony, what assured his return to gentler customs? What ritual could cleanse the animal from his hands? It is here, in this tension, that the wild man emerges. He appears first not as a beast, but as a caution. In early European folklore, particularly among Germanic and Slavic cultures, tales spoke of men who lived beyond villages, clad in fur or bark, their language reduced to grunts or silence. They were not cursed by gods, nor punished by magic. They were men who stayed too long in the wilderness, who allowed hunger, solitude, and moonlit nights to erode the structures of community within them. The moon, ever present above the hunt, became a silent witness to these transformations. Its pale cycles governed night travel, animal behavior, and the rhythms of exhaustion. Hunters moved by its light, slept beneath its gaze, and bled under its rise. Over time, the moon ceased to be merely a tool of visibility. It became a symbol of transition, the force that ruled what happened when society slept. In this context, the idea of men changing beneath moonlight was less myth than metaphor. Lunar phases marked time away from the village. A man gone too long returned thinner, quieter, eyes adjusted to darkness. He had seen things others had not. He had done things that could not be spoken near children or hearths. The community, sensing this difference, framed it in story. Not to accuse but to understand. The wild man was not evil. He was dangerous because he reminded others of their own capacity to slip. In medieval bestiaries and illuminated manuscripts, the wild man appears as a hairy, club-wielding figure, dwelling at the edge of maps. He is associated with forests, madness, and unrestrained desire. Yet scholars note that he often appears in liminal spaces, at borders, margins, and thresholds. He belongs neither fully to nature nor society. He exists between. This in-between state terrified settled peoples. Agrarian life depended on predictability. Seasons, cycles, obedience. The wild man represented what happened when order loosened. When a man no longer knelt to timekeeping bells, no longer feared social shame, no longer recognized himself in reflection. He was not an invader from outside. He was a reminder of what lay beneath the veneer of manners. Psychologically, the figure speaks to dissociation born of isolation and trauma. Modern studies of prolonged wilderness survival show measurable changes in cognition. Heightened aggression, altered sleep cycles, reduced empathy. In ancient times, without language for mental fracture, such changes were mythologized. The mind, altered by solitude and survival, was said to be claimed by the moon. The wolf became the most potent symbol of this fear. Wolves hunted in packs yet lived beyond human law. They were intelligent, social, and ruthlessly efficient. To early Europeans, they mirrored humanity too closely. A man who hunted like a wolf risked being seen as one. Thus, stories formed, not of sudden transformation, but of gradual forgetting. A man stops praying. He stops speaking. He eats raw meat. He begins to prefer the night. These stories were warnings told around fires, not to frighten children, but to restrain adults. Do not stray too far. Do not abandon the village. Do not trust the wild to leave you untouched. The wild man was the cost of imbalance, a life tilted too far toward survival, stripped of meaning beyond endurance. Importantly, these figures were rarely hunted down in early lore. They were avoided, pitted, or ritually contained. Some cultures even revered them as keepers of ancient knowledge, believing that those who lived with animals understood truths civilization had forgotten. In this way, the wild man carried both fear and reverence. He knew the forest. He knew hunger. He knew what humans once were. But reverence shifted as societies hardened. As laws replaced customs and cities grew denser, tolerance for ambiguity faded. The wild man's tragedy became his crime. By the late Middle Ages, the warning transformed into an accusation. Those who did not conform, vagrants, hermits, the mentally ill, were cast into the same narrative. Moon followers, beastmen, dead. The story narrowed. What was once a spectrum of transformation became a singular horror. Yet traces of the older meaning remain, buried beneath later monstrosity. At its core, the wild man myth is not about losing humanity to magic, but about losing balance to necessity. It asks an uncomfortable question. How much violence can a person commit before they are changed by it? How much isolation can the mind endure before it reshapes itself? The moon, indifferent and constant, watches these changes without judgment. It does not cause them. It illuminates them. In the silence of forests long gone, beneath skies unbroken by artificial light, our ancestors sensed a truth modern life often forgets, that civilization is not permanent. It is rehearsed daily, maintained by ritual, memory, and restraint. Step beyond it too often, and the rehearsals falter. The wild man stands as a silhouette at the edge of that understanding. Not a beast to be slain, but a mirror held uncomfortably close. He reminds us that the hunt still lives in the human body, that the night still knows our names, and that under the right conditions, the distance between citizen and predator is not as vast as we pretend. And when the moon rises, unchanging, ancient, it does not ask what we have become. It only reveals it. In the long evenings before written memory, when fire was the only border between safety and annihilation, the wolf waited at the edge of the light. Not as a monster, not yet, but as a presence. A silhouette moving just beyond the glow, where the world returned to teeth and cold breath. The fire cracked and breathed like a living thing, and beyond it, the forest listened. When the wolf howled, the sound did not simply travel through the dark. It entered the human body. It passed through the ribs, settled in the stomach, and reminded those gathered around the flame that they were not alone in the night. The wolf was not feared because it was unknown. It was feared because it was understood too well. Archaeology tells us that wolves and humans have shared landscapes for tens of thousands of years. They hunted the same prey. They read the same tracks in snow and mud. They learned the same lessons about patience, cooperation, and hunger. In this ancient rivalry, neither side was purely predator nor purely victim. Each recognized something familiar in the other. And it was this familiarity, this closeness, that made the wolf unbearable to fully accept. To early societies, the wolf was civilization's shadow twin. Where humans gathered in circles, wolves moved in packs. Where humans learned to share meat and protect the young, wolves did the same. But where humans built laws, rituals, and memory, wolves remained bound to instinct. They did not plant roots. They did not bury their dead. They did not pray. And so, the wolf became the embodiment of what waited beyond the fragile architecture of culture. A life ruled by hunger alone. The moon drew this connection tighter. Wolves hunt by night. Their eyes catch light when human vision fails. Their howls rise when the moon is high, not because the moon commands them, but because the silence invites sound. To human ears, however, the distinction did not matter. The timing felt intentional. The moon revealed the wolf, and the wolf gave the moon a voice. Across Eurasia, the Americas, and the ancient Near East, the image repeated itself. Silver light on fur, teeth flashing where fire could not reach. The wolf became the moon's chosen shape, its emissary on earth. Where the moon was distant and untouchable, the wolf was close enough to kill. In the howl, people heard more than an animal's call. They heard hunger, long, unending, and unsatisfied. They heard exile, the sound of something that belonged nowhere near the hearth. And beneath it all, they heard a question too dangerous to ask aloud. What separates us from this creature, really? For early agricultural communities, the wolf was a threat not only to life, but to order. It stole sheep from fenced pastures, tested boundaries, probing for weakness. Each successful raid was a reminder that human control over nature was incomplete, that the wild had not agreed to stay outside the walls. And so the wolf became moralized. Stories spread of wolves that punished greed, that devoured the careless, that appeared when taboos were broken. In some traditions, the wolf was an agent of cosmic balance, harsh but necessary. In others, it was a curse made flesh, a warning carved in muscle and bone. Either way, it was never neutral. The wolf carried meaning because it carried fear. This fear deepened when it crossed into the human body. Across medieval Europe, the figure of the werewolf emerged not as fantasy, but as explanation. A man who became a wolf beneath the moon was not an invention meant to entertain. He was a psychological solution to an unbearable thought, that a human could abandon the rules of society and survive. Lycanthropy was not originally about transformation of the body, but of allegiance. The werewolf was a traitor to the village, to the church, to the shared illusion of control. He did not simply kill, he hunted. He did not steal, he fed. And in doing so, he exposed the thinness of the line separating survival from savagery. Court records from early modern Europe describe accused werewolves with disturbing consistency. These were often men on the margins. The poor, the itinerant, the mentally ill, the traumatized. Those who lived close to forests. Those who did not gather easily around the fire. Their crimes, real or imagined, were framed not as acts of desperation, but as evidence of inner corruption. They had listened too closely to the night. The wolf, in these narratives, was not the villain. It was the excuse. Psychologically, the wolf represented something civilization could not domesticate within itself. Humans are capable of cooperation, but also of extraordinary violence. We suppress this knowledge through ritual, law, and myth. The wolf gave shape to what could not be safely acknowledged. That hunger does not disappear when societies grow complex. It merely learns to wait. Even as wolves were hunted, trapped, and driven toward extinction in many regions, their symbolic power only grew. The fewer real wolves that remained, the more mythic they became. Absence sharpened fear. The idea of the wolf outlived its physical presence. And always the moon remained above it all, cold, distant, and unchanged. The moon did not care whether wolves survived or vanished. It did not cause their hunger or their howls. But to human minds seeking patterns, the moon became the witness. The silent observer that watched both the fire-lit village and the dark forest without judgment. It illuminated both order and chaos equally. This impartiality was terrifying. To be watched by the moon was to be seen without excuse. Beneath its light, humans imagined that the wolf saw them too, not as masters of the land, but as animals pretending otherwise. The fear was not that wolves would devour humanity, but that they revealed humanity's true nature. In time, dogs would be welcomed into the firelight. wolves would be pushed further back into story. But the distinction was never complete. Even today, when a dog lifts its head and howls at the moon, something ancient stirs. A memory older than language. A sound that does not belong to comfort. The wolf at the edge of firelight is not simply a relic of the past. It is a reminder. It reminds us that civilization is not a permanent state, but a daily effort. That the rules we live by are learned, not innate. And that beneath them, hunger waits, patient, observant, and capable of returning if the fire goes out. When our ancestors listened to the howl rise through the trees, they were not only afraid of what stood beyond the flames. They were afraid of what might step out of the circle if fear, famine, or despair loosened its grip. The wolf did not need to enter the firelight to haunt them. It was enough that it stayed just outside, watching, breathing, and reminding humanity that the night remembers us, even when we try to forget ourselves. In the long night of human memory, fear rarely stood alone. Gathered tools. It learned rituals. It shaped objects and words into defenses against what could not be reasoned with or undone. When the moon rose and stories of transformation followed, terror did not always seek destruction. More often it sought restraint. Across villages and centuries, belief hardened into practice. People did not simply fear the changed. They feared the change itself. The possibility that the boundary between the human and the inhuman was fragile, porous, and dangerously near. To live with that fear, they reached for symbols strong enough to hold it back. Metal was among the first answers. Cold, bright, unyielding. Long before silver was associated with purity or wealth, it was revered for its resistance. Unlike iron, which rusted and decayed, silver seemed to endure. It reflected light when the world was dark. In a time when the moon governed both terror and tides, silver's pale gleam felt like an answer written in the same celestial language. It was not a weapon meant to spill blood, but a barrier, something to place between oneself and the unthinkable. Archaeological records and medieval texts alike reveal how metals were woven into protective logic. Rings, pins, coins sewn into clothing, knives laid across thresholds. In parts of Europe, silver was placed beneath pillows or tied to cradles, guarding sleepers against nocturnal visitations that left no footprints but fear. These objects were not symbols of aggression. They were symbols of containment. To bind the unseen. To weigh it down. To remind the night that some lines could not be crossed. Charms followed a similar logic. They were small, portable worlds of meaning. Knots, herbs, teeth, carved symbols carried close to the skin. In an era where literacy was rare, memory lived in objects. A charm was a prayer made tangible, a belief you could hold in your hand. Wolf's teeth were worn not to invite the beast, but to master it, to wear the danger outward so it could not turn inward. The logic was paradoxical yet precise. To survive transformation, one had to acknowledge its power without surrendering to it. Prayers, too, became part of this architecture of restraint. As Christianity spread across Europe, older lunar fears did not vanish. They were absorbed. Saints replaced spirits. Psalms replaced incantations. Yet the function remained unchanged. Words were spoken aloud not because they killed monsters, but because they steadied the speaker. In whispered prayers before sleep, people reaffirmed their place within order, within light, within humanity itself. Church records from the Middle Ages show a curious restraint in dealing with those accused of lunar afflictions. Unlike witches who were often executed, alleged werewolves were sometimes bound, confined, or isolated. Chains were preferred to flames. Confinement to execution. This distinction reveals something essential. The werewolf was not always viewed as an enemy. He was seen as a neighbor who had slipped, temporarily, into something else. Taboos emerged alongside rituals, forming invisible fences around behavior. Certain nights were avoided. Certain roads left unwalked. Certain foods left untouched. People learned when not to hunt, when not to travel, when not to look too closely at the forest edge. These were not signs of ignorance. They were survival strategies shaped by generations of observation and fear. Taboos simplified a dangerous world into rules the mind could follow when reason faltered. Anthropologically, these rituals served a deeper purpose than protection. They reinforced identity. To participate in the ritual was to declare oneself human, stable, and aligned with the community. To refuse was to invite suspicion. Fear was not only of the transformed, but of isolation, the terror of standing alone beneath the moon, unclaimed by ritual or belief. Psychologically, restraint rituals externalized anxiety. They gave form to the invisible. Transformation, whether literal or symbolic, is one of humanity's oldest fears. Illness changes the body. Grief changes the mind. Hunger changes morality. In a world without medical explanation, these shifts felt supernatural, contagious, and morally dangerous. Rituals allowed people to believe that change could be managed, delayed, or contained. Silver did not kill the werewolf because killing was never the point. Killing would not solve the deeper fear, that anyone could become the thing they feared most. Restraint allowed hope. It suggested reversibility, that the night might pass, that the moon would wane, that the man who howled today might return tomorrow, ashamed, silent, and human once more. Even the language of these rituals reflects mercy wrapped in terror. Words like binding, warding, keeping at bay, not erasing, not destroying, holding the line. Civilization, after all, is not built on purity but on limits, on agreed-upon boundaries that say, this far and no further. Across cultures beyond Europe, similar patterns emerge. In parts of Asia, talismans were used to restrain shape-shifting spirits rather than banish them. In indigenous traditions, rituals were performed to guide those who had lost themselves back into balance, not to condemn them. The fear of transformation was universal, but so was the hope of return. Over time, these rituals lost their literal meaning but retained their shape. Silver became symbolism. Charms became jewelry. Prayers became habit. Yet the structure remains. Even in modern language we speak of losing control, of becoming someone else, of fighting inner beasts. The old rituals persist, stripped of their cosmology but rich in psychological truth. They remind us that fear is rarely about the monster itself. It is about proximity, about recognition, about the quiet suspicion that the line between self and other is thin enough to tear under the right moon. In the end, rituals of restraint were acts of fragile compassion. They acknowledged danger without surrendering to cruelty. They allowed communities to live with fear without becoming it. In binding the imagined beast, people were binding their own dread, wrapping it in metal, words, and rules strong enough to survive the night. And when the moon finally set, when dawn diluted the silver glow into pale memory, what remained was not proof of monsters defeated, but evidence of something far older and more enduring. Humanity's desperate, beautiful attempt to hold itself together when the dark felt too close to the skin. In the long memory of humankind, the moon was never merely a light. It was a presence, quiet, distant, and impossibly intimate. It rose without fire, ruled without command, and returned with a patience that felt deliberate. Long before calendars or telescopes, before scripture or science, people sensed that the moon did not simply illuminate the night, governed it. And in that governance they imagined a will. Across continents and centuries, that will took a familiar shape. The moon was given a woman's face. Not because it was gentle but because it was powerful in ways that defied control. In the ancient world, femininity was not understood as weakness. It was mystery made flesh. The ability to create life, to bleed without dying, to endure cycles that men could not experience and therefore could not explain. The moon mirrored this rhythm with unsettling precision. It waxed and waned like the womb. It disappeared and returned. It governed tides, seasons, and blood. And so, it became mother, goddess, devourer. In Mesopotamia, where civilization first learned to write its fears, the moon god Sin, later Nana, measured time itself. Kings ruled by his calendar. Harvests bowed to his phases. Yet even here, where the moon was masculine in name, its power remained maternal in function. cyclical, fertile, and absolute. Time was not a straight line. It was a womb that opened and closed. Farther west in the Greek world, the moon fractured into three faces: Selene in the heavens, Artemis in the wild, Hecate at the crossroads of death. Together they formed a lunar trinity: maiden, mother, crone, birth, life, decay. The full arc of existence contained within a single celestial body. Artemis brought animals into the world, yet struck down those who broke her laws. Hecate guided souls but also haunted them. The moon did not choose between mercy and cruelty. It embodied both. This duality was not philosophical abstraction. It was lived reality. For ancient women, the moon was a clock written into their bodies. Menstruation aligned with its phases. Pregnancy followed its slow arithmetic. Childbirth, often fatal, unfolded beneath its watchful glow. To give life was to flirt constantly with death. And so the moon, which governed fertility, also governed loss, stillbirth, hemorrhage, infection. The pale light that welcomed birth also illuminated graves. In Egypt, Isis held this balance with terrifying grace. She was the healer who reassembled her husband's body, restoring life through devotion and magic. But she was also the goddess who taught that resurrection demanded sacrifice. Nothing returned without cost. The moon, reflected in the Nile's rise and fall, confirmed this truth each year. Floods fed the land, but they also drowned it. Fertility was never free. In Mesoamerica, the moon goddess Coilzaqui was torn apart by her own brother. Her body scattered across the sky. Her myth explained not only lunar phases but cosmic violence, the idea that creation itself was born from dismemberment. Life in these stories did not emerge cleanly. It emerged screaming. Even in distant East Asia, Chang'e ascended to the moon through stolen immortality. She became eternal, but alone, cut off from the human world she longed for. The moon granted preservation but not belonging. To live forever was to be exiled from life itself. Again and again the pattern returned. Lunar goddesses nourished, but they also punished. They demanded restraint. Artemis slew Actaeon for seeing what was forbidden. Selene abandoned lovers when desire crossed into possession. The moon rewarded reverence and destroyed excess. This was not moral instruction in the modern sense. It was a warning written into myth. Balance sustains life. Imbalance invites annihilation. Anthropologically, these stories emerged from a world where survival depended on cycles humans could not command. Overhunting led to starvation. Excessive farming exhausted the soil. Unchecked desire, sexual, social, territorial, fractured communities. The moon became a cosmic metaphor for restraint. It reminded people that growth without limit is a form of death. Psychologically, the moon goddess embodied an ancient terror. The fear of the source turning against you. The mother who feeds can also withhold. The womb that shelters can also suffocate. This ambivalence haunted early societies, especially those shaped by maternal mortality and infant loss. Love and fear were not opposites. They were inseparable. And so devotion to lunar goddesses was rarely joyous. It was solemn, ritualistic, careful. Offerings were given not to invite favor, but to avoid wrath. Blood, milk, silver, substances associated with life and reflection, were laid at their altars. Not as bribes, but acknowledgments of dependence. The moon did not need worship. It needed recognition. As patriarchal structures hardened and monotheistic religions rose, these goddesses were not erased. They were diminished. Their temples fell silent. Their myths were rewritten as cautionary tales. Powerful lunar mothers became witches, demons, seductresses. The source of life was reframed as a threat to order. Yet the fear never vanished. It lingered in folklore, in nursery rhymes, in the unease surrounding menstruation and childbirth. It lived in the suspicion of women who lived alone, who aged without husbands, who understood herbs and cycles too well. The moon's daughters were no longer goddesses, but they were still dangerous. Even today the language remains. We speak of Mother Nature with reverence and dread. We describe disasters as acts beyond reason. We track cycles, fertility, and moods with technology, yet still feel a primitive unease under a full moon. Rationality explains the mechanics, but not the feeling. Because the moon was never only about astronomy. It was about dependence. It was about the unbearable truth that life is sustained by forces that do not care about us individually. That creation and destruction are not moral opposites, but partners. That what gives us life may one day take it back, without malice and without apology. In the ancient night, beneath the slow-moving heavens, people learned this lesson early. They watched the moon feed crops and flood fields. They watched it mark fertility and miscarriage. They watched it shine over births and funerals alike. And they understood something modernity struggles to accept. That nurture is not kindness. That motherhood is not mercy. That creation is not gentle. The moon did not promise safety. Promised continuity. And as it still rises, pale, distant, unchanged, it reminds us of a truth our ancestors never forgot. That life endures not because it is protected, but because it is balanced on the edge of destruction, forever cycling between light and loss. In the long centuries before certainty hardened into law, fear rarely announced itself as fear. It arrived instead as suspicion, as rumor, as a quiet tightening of the community's gaze. When crops failed, when livestock vanished, when children woke screaming from dreams they could not name, people searched for meaning in the nearest shadow. And often that shadow already had a face. Across villages and forest margins, there were always those who lived slightly apart. The hermit who spoke little. The woman whose body did not follow expected rhythms. The man whose illness bent his posture and loosened his speech. They were not born monstrous. They were made so by the slow arithmetic of anxiety. When reason faltered, communities did not confront the chaos of the world. They narrowed it, pressed it into human shape, and gave it a name that could be spoken aloud. The moon, pale and unanswering, became accomplice to this transformation. Its cycles offered a pattern where none could be found, a celestial clock onto which disorder could be pinned. Those who behaved strangely were said to follow it, to feel its pull more keenly than others. They were accused not of crimes, but of alignment, of walking in step with a force that civilized life struggled to tame. To be called a moon follower was not merely to be feared. It was to be declared uncontained by human law. Historical records from medieval Europe preserve this logic with chilling clarity. Court documents speak of men who claimed to roam as wolves, not in spirit, but in flesh. These were not always stories of fantasy. Some scholars now recognize in them early descriptions of lycanthropy, a psychological condition in which sufferers believed themselves transformed. Yet, in the moral universe of the village, explanation mattered less than reassurance. To name the afflicted as cursed was to preserve the illusion that the rest were safe. Illness, especially of the mind, offered fertile ground for such accusations. Epilepsy, sleep disorders, and fevers that brought hallucination were poorly understood, but deeply unsettling. When symptoms worsened under the glare of a full moon, a coincidence born of sleeplessness and expectation, the association hardened into belief. The moon was no longer distant stone and light. It was an instigator, and those who trembled beneath it were its agents. These accused often lived alone, not because they sought exile, but because exclusion came quietly. Work was offered less often. Conversations ended more quickly. Children were warned not to linger near their doors. By the time formal accusation arrived, the social verdict had already been delivered. Justice in these moments was less a process than a performance, one designed to reassure the many at the expense of the few. Anthropologically, this pattern is ancient and familiar. Societies under stress instinctively search for scapegoats, figures upon whom fear can be safely discharged. The accused moon follower became a vessel for everything that resisted order: wildness, sickness, hunger, sexual irregularity, grief that would not resolve. By condemning one, the community symbolically purified itself. The howl attributed to these figures was not always a sound. Often it was simply the refusal or inability to conform. In some regions, particularly along the forested edges of Europe, these accusations blurred dangerously with folklore of werewolves. Unlike later romanticized versions, these early tales were stark and moralizing. The werewolf was not a creature of thrill, but of warning. A man who abandoned restraint, who succumbed to appetite, who crossed the line between human law and animal necessity. To accuse someone of such a transformation was to suggest that civilization itself was reversible. Religion did not immediately soften this judgment. While Christian doctrine emphasized the soul's salvation, it also reinforced the fear of hidden corruption. The idea that a person could appear human while secretly serving darker forces fit easily into a worldview obsessed with vigilance. The moon, already suspect as a remnant of pagan reverence, became a convenient symbol of lingering heresy. Those who followed it were imagined as resisting divine order, even if only unconsciously. Punishments varied, but the effect was always the same: isolation made permanent. Some were imprisoned. Others were driven out. A few disappeared into records that end abruptly, without explanation. What remains is the silence around them, a historical absence that speaks louder than testimony. These were people who howled alone not because they were beasts, but because no one remained to hear them as human. Psychologically, the tragedy runs deeper still. To live under constant suspicion is to internalize it. Some accused came to believe the stories told about them, shaping their identities around the myths imposed from without. In this way, folklore did not merely describe behavior, it created it. Fear became recursive, feeding itself through expectation and response, until the boundary between belief and reality dissolved. Modern science offers explanations for much of what once inspired terror. Yet understanding does not erase the emotional truth of these histories. The accused moon follower stands as a reminder of how fragile empathy becomes when survival feels threatened. Communities did not persecute out of cruelty alone, but out of desperation, a desire to impose meaning on suffering, even if that meaning demanded sacrifice. The moon itself remained unchanged throughout these centuries. It rose and fell, indifferent to accusation and absolution alike. But in its light, humanity revealed a quieter violence, the willingness to trade compassion for certainty. Those who were cast as followers of the moon were never truly following it. They were being pushed toward it, into the cold margins where explanation failed and fear ruled unchallenged. And so, in the echo of these forgotten lives, the howl lingers, not as a sound of monstrosity, but of loneliness. A reminder that the greatest transformations are not written in fur or fong, but in the moment a society decides who belongs within the circle of light, and who must remain forever outside it, under the watching moon. In the long shadow of the medieval night, the moon hung like a pale witness above villages stitched from timber and clay. Its silver face, once feared and worshipped in equal measure, had become a quiet specter. Not entirely gone, not entirely tamed, it lingered at the edges of hearthfire and prayer. Where once the wilderness had been the domain of spirits, wolves, and the restless dead, the rising tide of organized faith sought to claim dominion over both earth and sky. Monks and priests, cloaked in the authority of God, lifted their voices against the old shadows, reading scripture in the flicker of candlelight, yet the moon continued to shine, impartial, indifferent, a reminder that the night belonged to no single power. Christianity, Islam, and other emerging religious structures did not simply banish the old beliefs. They absorbed, reframed, and repurposed them. The wild magic of the moon, its cycles of influence, its seductive pull upon human behavior, could not be entirely erased. Instead, it was given new names and new moral frameworks. The werewolf of folk memory became a cautionary tale of sin, of the soul unmoored from God's light. Lunar madness, once an affliction blamed on nature itself, was now a test of faith, an accusation of moral weakness, a measure of piety or its absence. The Church, in its vast ambition to civilize and codify, sought to replace the language of fear with the language of redemption. Yet the underlying question remained: what of the darkness that could not be prayed away, the shadows that waited patiently in the woods, the corners of human hearts untouched by sermons. Across Europe, the moon's presence in folklore persisted in spite of holy edicts. Saints and angels took the place of spirits, but the stories of nocturnal terror endured. Tales of men transformed under silvered light, of women bewitched, of children lost to the night, continued to be whispered beside the hearth, long after the bells had tolled and the Mass had ended. In Normandy, a monk might speak of Saint Genevieve protecting Paris, while a farmer's wife murmured of the loup-garou roaming the forests beyond the fields. The world of organized religion and the world of human fear coexisted uneasily. Two layers of reality pressed together, one mortal, one divine, both attempting to explain the inexplicable. To understand this tension is to understand the human need to anchor the unknown in narrative. The night has always been a mirror of the mind. Shadows extend long fingers in the corners of the eye, and the imagination, untempered, can see 1,000 faces where there is none. The moon, constant and silent, illuminated this fragile theater. Even as sermons were written and prayers recited, the old stories whispered of danger not merely from the wilderness, but from the self. Men who walked willingly into darkness, who abandoned hearth and order, were the greatest threat. In some ways, the clergy's warnings were a recognition of a truth older than doctrine. Civilization is a thin veneer, and beneath it waits a wilderness of desire, hunger, and fear. In monasteries perched on cliffs, priests charted the heavens with painstaking care, noting the moon's phases alongside the seasons, the planting and harvesting of crops, and the festivals of the saints. To the learned, the lunar cycle was a clock, precise and predictable. To the common folk, however, its rise and fall still held magic, a rhythm that could pull at sleep, stir the restless, and awaken impulses long suppressed. Even as holy texts sought to explain the moral universe in terms of divine will, the moon remained a silent interlocutor, questioning authority with its inexorable orbit. It was neither good nor evil, only persistent, and persistence has a way of becoming legend. Sermons against the night often employed the language of danger, equating darkness with temptation, disobedience, and demonic influence. The faithful were warned of the men and women who lingered under the moon, who sought knowledge or pleasure outside the bounds of the church, who listened instead to the ancient rhythms of the world. To transgress was to risk the soul, yet the warnings themselves betrayed a fascination. For in every caution, there is the hint of something irresistible. Faith in this sense did not erase fear, it reframed it. The threat of transformation, of chaos, was not gone. It was sanctified, clothed in scripture and ritual, and placed under the careful gaze of the saints. Even architecture reflected this uneasy reconciliation between human order and lunar caprice. Cathedrals, with their soaring spires, seemed to reach toward the heavens in defiance of the wild sky, yet their stained glass often depicted the cosmos, the sun and moon included among the angels and stars. The moon, though stripped of its agency in official doctrine, remained present, a silent observer above vaulted stone, a witness to both devotion and doubt. Peasant festivals continued to mark its phases, holy or otherwise, and the rhythm of life continued to echo its cycle. Humans, for all their faith, remained tethered to the ancient patterns of nature, whether they admitted it or not. In the quiet of the night, the tension between belief and fear created a strange form of reverence. The faithful did not merely bow to God. They also bowed, however subtly, to the ineffable. The moon, rising steadily above the steeples and cottages, reminded them of limits beyond law and ritual, of impulses that faith could guide but never fully extinguish. It was a mirror, not of vice alone, but of vulnerability, a reflection of what humans are when they are most alone, most exposed to the primal rhythms that predated civilization. And so, the moon remained, a patient observer of the ages. Saints, priests, and scholars attempted to assert dominion over the heavens, yet the night carried its own memory. Every shadow that stretched across a cobbled street, every whispered fear of transformation, every glance toward a silvered sky, was a testament to a past that faith could contain but never erase. In its light, humans glimpsed both their fragility and their stubborn will to endure, to create meaning amidst uncertainty, to seek protection even while confronting what could not be fully understood. By the time the modern era dawned and science began to chart the heavens with precision, the old stories had not vanished. They had simply adapted, folded into the new lexicon of psychiatry, folklore studies, and literary imagination. The moon was still watched, still feared, still revered, a reminder that civilization does not conquer nature, only negotiates with it. And those who wandered willingly into the darkness, who walked its edges with curiosity or recklessness, continued to occupy a liminal space. Neither fully human nor fully myth, forever a bridge between the known and the unknowable. In the end, faith did not abolish the night. It confronted it. It offered shelter and structure, a moral framework to navigate fear. Yet the moon, impartial and luminous, endured as a quiet testament to the old truths. That darkness is eternal, that human hearts are fragile, and that the night will always remember those who dared to walk within it. And beneath its pale gaze, even the most devout knew that some shadows could not be banished, only understood, respected, and perhaps reluctantly embraced. In the waning light of the Enlightenment, when reason was hailed as the lantern to illuminate all shadows, the moon began to yield its secrets to the tools of science. Telescopes traced its craters and seas. Charts recorded its motion with mathematical precision. And yet, for all its measured orbit and predictable phases, the moon's hold over the human imagination persisted. It became clear that knowledge could explain the mechanics of its movement, the pull on tides, the reflection of the sun's fire, but it could not undo the centuries of stories, fears, and obsessions that clung to its silvered surface. The moon, now stripped of divinity in the minds of astronomers, retained a quiet, almost imperceptible authority over the hearts it had long stirred. Even as scholars mapped the heavens with relentless rigor, the human psyche proved stubbornly uncooperative. The lunacy of legend, once attributed to supernatural influence, was now relegated to the domain of medicine and psychiatry. Lunacy, the term itself derived from luna, marked a lingering acknowledgement of the ancient fear that the moon could sway the mind. Fevered nights, erratic behavior, sleeplessness, and melancholy were recorded in journals with scientific detachment, yet the connection between the silver disk and human vulnerability endured in collective memory. Folk tales persisted alongside medical texts, their moral weight unchanged, their imagery just as potent. Men howling under the moon, women wandering the forests, communities watching anxiously from candlelit windows. Science had explained the motion, but it could not erase the shadow that had been cast over generations. The Enlightenment offered certainty, but certainty brought its own unease. For as the moon became predictable, the human heart remained enigmatic. Scholars dissected its influence on tides, catalogued its position against the stars, and predicted eclipses with mathematical precision. Yet the same moon that could be measured with numbers continued to awaken impulses that resisted measurement. Obsession, wonder, longing, and fear. Literature, too, embraced this duality. Poets and novelists, inspired by the silver glow, explored the borderlands of human reason and emotion, weaving tales where the moon illuminated not only landscapes but hidden desires and transgressions. In this way, science and myth coexisted, one describing the moon's physical presence, the other bearing witness to its enduring psychological and cultural gravity. To understand the lingering shadow is to understand the subtle interplay between knowledge and memory. The Enlightenment promised mastery over the unknown, yet humans remained tethered to rhythms older than reason. The night, even when rationalized, remained a canvas for imagination. Moonlight spilling over cobblestones or glinting upon quiet waters stirred reflexes honed across millennia. Fear, caution, reverence. Communities continued to mark the full moon with festivals or warnings, as if the very orbit of the celestial body dictated behavior. In the laboratories and observatories of Europe, instruments could track the lunar cycle, but they could not track the stories it had inspired, the rituals it had shaped, or the subconscious unease it still provoked. Even modern medicine, for all its rigor, could not wholly sever the moon from the human condition. Nighttime disturbances in sleep, sudden onset of anxiety, or bouts of aggression continued to be attributed, however implicitly, to the pull of a world beyond immediate understanding. In folklore, these same behaviors had been attributed to spirits or curses, to possession or enchantment. Science reframed the phenomena, yet it could not erase the emotional resonance of those ancient interpretations. The moon had become both a subject of empirical observation and a mirror of human vulnerability. It reflected our desire to impose order on nature, and our failure to impose order on ourselves. In literature, painting, and music, the moon persisted as a symbol of liminality, the threshold between rationality and instinct, the boundary between civilization and wilderness. Romantic poets of the 19th century described it as a silver sentinel over lonely landscapes, illuminating hidden truths and silent griefs. Gothic novels used its glow to mark moments of transformation, revelation, or horror. Even as telescopes recorded its geography, human hearts inscribed their own cartography upon it, maps of longing, fear, and fascination that could not be quantified or contained. The moon had become, simultaneously, a scientific object and a repository of human imagination, a duality that mirrored the struggle between reason and the residual echoes of myth. What is remarkable is how enduring this shadow proved. Knowledge, for all its power, is never total. The human mind does not relinquish centuries of fear and meaning simply because a principle can be proven. Lunar influence, whether rationalized or remembered, continued to shape behavior in subtle ways. Timing of rituals, agricultural practices, folklore, and even the rhythm of human emotion. The moon, it seemed, had achieved a kind of immortality, one rooted not in divinity, but in the stubborn persistence of memory and imagination. Even in the Age of Enlightenment, its glow reminded humans that some truths are not merely empirical, but existential, tied to the deepest chords of fear, desire, and wonder. To walk under a full moon is to step into a lineage of observation and imagination that stretches back through history. Every shadowed path, every rustle in the forest, every restless night carries echoes of the ancients who looked skyward and whispered prayers, warnings, or curses. The scientific observer and the superstitious villager, separated by centuries of knowledge, share the same experience. The silver light touches the same human vulnerabilities, stirs the same hidden impulses, and evokes the same quiet awe. In this way, the moon becomes a bridge between eras, a living testament to the interplay of understanding and mystery. And so, the lingering shadow remains. Science has charted the moon's orbit, catalogued its surface, and predicted its movements with unwavering accuracy. Yet it cannot chart the human heart beneath it. The old fears, the residual awe, the pull of imagination and instinct, these persist quietly, invisibly, as if embedded in the very rhythm of the lunar cycle. The moon is now a known quantity, yet it retains a presence that transcends knowledge, a subtle, enduring influence over human thought, myth, and emotion. In the end, the moon illustrates a profound truth about the human condition, that no matter how much is explained, measured, or catalogued, the heart and mind retain shadows that cannot be erased. We may know the moon as an object of science, yet it remains a mirror to our own duality, rational and irrational, enlightened and fearful, curious and vulnerable. Its light continues to fall upon our lives, illuminating not only the physical world, but the invisible landscapes of memory, myth, and imagination. And in that quiet silver glow, we are reminded that knowledge and wonder are never wholly separate, that the shadow once feared continues to watch patiently as it has always done. In the quiet hours of the modern world, when cities hum with electricity and streets glow with artificial light, the moon remains patient and unchanged. Its silver gaze passes unnoticed by most, yet it continues to stir echoes of fear and fascination that have traveled through centuries. No longer the ruler of madness or the arbiter of human fate, it has become a figure of memory, a mirror reflecting the stories we inherited, reshaped, and carried forward. It exists simultaneously in science and myth, in literature and film, in the flicker of a cinema screen and the hush of a bedtime story. The moon, though distant, remains a quiet witness to the persistence of human imagination. Cinema, literature, and folklore have carried the moon into a new age of symbolism. Gothic novels describe transformations under its glow, while modern horror films trace the inheritance of ancient fears, lycanthropy, madness, obsession, through the lens of narrative. The full moon is now a stage light, illuminating both terror and beauty, a reminder of what was feared and what continues to fascinate. Folk tales once whispered in village squares are now broadcast to millions, yet the underlying human truths remain unchanged. The moon awakens something in us, not because of its power, but because of its constancy, its indifference, and the long shadow it casts on human memory. Even as science explains its orbit, composition, and gravitational influence, the moon retains a presence in the human psyche that defies measurement. It evokes awe, nostalgia, and unease, an emblem of what lies beyond understanding. Astronauts walk upon its surface, cameras capture its craters in precise detail, yet its cultural and emotional resonance continues to grow, not diminish. In poetry, the moon remains a muse, a silent companion to longing and melancholy. In music, its phases mark time and mood, echoing the rhythms of human life long before clocks and calendars existed. The moon is no longer feared as a supernatural force, but it is remembered, revered, and imagined, a bridge between the primal and the contemporary. The moon also carries the weight of personal memory. Many of the fears and superstitions attached to it have softened into reflection. Lovers gaze upon its glow, children are lulled to sleep under its light, and storytellers weave it into tales that blend wonder with melancholy. Yet beneath the veneer of romance, there persists a subtle unease, a whisper of the primal fears that once dominated human thought. Transformation, chaos, and the unknown, once the currency of survival, have been recast as metaphor, but the metaphor retains its power. To see the full moon is to encounter the same force that terrified ancestors, not in its ability to harm, but in its ability to remind us of our vulnerability, our imagination, and the fragile line between order and chaos. Societies have attempted to domesticate the moon, folding it into calendars, festivals, and rituals that carry the imprint of both faith and folklore. Religious holidays mark its phases, agricultural practices still reference its cycles, and popular culture continues to celebrate its symbolic resonance. Yet for all its domestication, the moon remains elusive. It is not conquered by science, nor fully possessed by myth. It exists in the liminal space between knowledge and imagination, a persistent presence whose power lies in reflection rather than action. It reminds humanity that memory is a kind of magic, a force that endures beyond reason, evidence, and the fleeting concerns of the day. The modern moon is also a mirror of cultural transformation. Where medieval villagers once feared the men and women who followed the moon, contemporary society interprets such behaviors differently, as eccentricity, passion, or artistic inspiration. Yet the imagery persists. The solitary figure beneath a pale glow, the restless traveler stirred by lunar light, the human psyche teased by invisible rhythms. Artists, writers, and filmmakers continue to draw upon these inherited fears and fascinations, not merely to terrify, but to explore the depth of human experience. The moon, once a harbinger of danger, is now a tool of reflection, a reminder of the continuity of human imagination across time. What endures most, however, is the moon's function as a repository for the stories humans tell themselves about themselves. It is a witness to solitude and contemplation, to longing and regret, to joy and grief. In the modern mind, it serves as both guide and mirror, illuminating the outer world while revealing the inner. Its light touches landscapes and cityscapes alike, yet it also illuminates the contours of memory, shaping the ways we understand fear, desire, and wonder. In this sense, the moon is less a celestial body and more a living archive, preserving the human experience across centuries, cultures, and generations. Even the scientific advances of the 20th and 21st centuries, the space missions, the photographs, and the data, have not diminished the moon's poetic power. If anything, they have expanded it. Seeing the Earth rise over the lunar horizon, observing its desolate beauty, humans are reminded of both the vastness of the cosmos and the intimacy of imagination. The same moon that inspired ancient fears now inspires awe, curiosity, and creativity. Its light is a bridge, connecting our ancestors to us and us to the infinite. In this way, memory and science coexist. Empirical understanding does not erase the poetry of fear, fascination, or reverence. To walk beneath a full moon today is to step into the accumulated consciousness of centuries. Every shadow, every reflection upon water, every silvered branch carries with it traces of belief, superstition, ritual, and wonder. Humans, though no longer at the mercy of the wilderness, remain at the mercy of imagination. The moon, though silent, participates in this quiet dialogue, its light a reminder of the interplay between the seen and unseen, the rational and irrational, the historical and the eternal. And so, the moon endures in memory, culture, and imagination. It is no longer feared as a ruler of madness or a celestial arbiter of fate, yet it remains, quietly, as a symbol of human fragility and resilience. Its glow illuminates the continuity of human thought, the fears, the obsessions, the stories, and the reverence that have traveled from prehistoric skies to modern streets. In the reflection of its light, we see not only the moon itself, but the persistence of ourselves, our capacity for wonder, for fear, for storytelling, and for remembrance. In the end, the moon is a keeper of history, a silent archivist of human emotion. It no longer commands obedience or terror, but it continues to watch, quietly, as it always has. And in its patient glow, we are reminded that memory, imagination, and the stories we inherit are as enduring as the celestial body itself. The night, despite progress and reason, remains a place where the past and present meet, and the moon, steadfast in its orbit, illuminates the fragile, beautiful continuity of human life. Even as the centuries pass, the moon endures. It rises, indifferent and luminous, over forests, oceans, and cities alike, a silent witness to the lives of humans who glance upward, unaware of its quiet authority. No longer a god, no longer a source of dread in the eyes of law or religion, it nevertheless holds dominion over something older: memory, instinct, and imagination. In its pale glow, the accumulated fears, obsessions, and longings of countless generations gather like mist, shaping the way we perceive ourselves and the night around us. The moon does not act, it only illuminates, yet illumination is power, subtle and persistent. Humanity has always projected itself onto the moon. Ancient peoples saw it as a ruler of madness, a measure of time, a deity of cycles. They traced its phases, feared its influence, and wove it into rituals of protection and worship. Even as knowledge advanced, the moon remained a mirror to human vulnerability, a reflection of what is wild, fragile, and ungovernable in the human psyche. Science has explained its movements, astronomy has mapped its craters, and space travelers have walked its surface, yet no formula, no observation, can fully account for the resonance it still holds. Its influence is no longer literal, but it is no less profound. It persists in the hidden patterns of imagination, in literature, art, and memory, in the quiet stirrings that surface when night falls and the world becomes still. The moon's gaze is impartial. It watches kings and beggars alike, saints and heretics, the devout and the wandering. It illuminates both the orderly and the chaotic, the civilized and the wild. Those who walked willingly into darkness, in thought, in action, in spirit, have always fascinated as much as they terrified. They were once blamed for lunar madness, for misfortune, for the unknowable acts that occurred under silvered skies. Today they are remembered differently, as artists, dreamers, rebels, or simply as humans navigating the thin line between what is known and what is mysterious. The moon, ever patient, records nothing yet reveals everything, its silent authority stretching across time, reminding us of the continuity of human experience. Civilization, for all its progress, has not tamed the night. Even in cities lit by electricity, the full moon casts shadows into alleys and across rooftops, touching the same instinctual fears and fascinations that shaped the lives of our ancestors. Modern psychology may explain sleep cycles, mood disorders, and behavioral anomalies, but the symbolic power of the moon endures, echoing across consciousness and culture. It is a reminder that human understanding is never complete, that knowledge is layered atop instinct, and that stories, the ones passed down, rewritten, or invented, continue to govern the imagination as much as any law or doctrine ever did. The moon's light reveals more than the landscape. It reveals the self. In its glow, humans confront both the ordinary and the extraordinary within themselves. The moon reflects our solitude and our desire, our curiosity and our fear. It illuminates the edges of morality and the shadowed corners of memory. Even when unseen, it exerts a subtle presence, reminding us that there are parts of our world, and parts of ourselves, that remain uncharted. Its constancy is a quiet challenge, to acknowledge that fear, wonder, and imagination are inseparable, and that some truths lie not in logic, but in the experience of beholding the night. Legends of men and women who followed the moon, those who surrendered to its rhythms or defied its warning, survive because they speak to something fundamental: the tension between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness, reason and instinct. These figures, whether feared as monsters or revered as mystics, carry the imprint of the human need to explain what cannot be fully understood. They are ghosts not of flesh, but of memory, and the moon remains their witness, impartial and eternal. Every howl, every whisper, every tale of transformation or obsession is reflected in its light, reminding the living that history is not merely a record of events, but a landscape of emotion, imagination, and warning. To stand beneath the moon is to participate in an ancient dialogue. We are connected to those who walked before us: hunters, villagers, mystics, and scholars, all of whom looked up and found in the pale glow both awe and fear. The moon has observed empires rise and fall, faiths clash, and knowledge advance, yet it remains unmoved, indifferent to human pride or folly. Its light touches everything equally, a quiet witness to continuity and change alike. It is a reminder that the night remembers, and that in the silver illumination of the moon, the past persists, shaping how we see ourselves and the world around us. Even in a modern age, when technology dominates perception and reason is exalted above superstition, the moon's presence is uncanny. It casts shadows that are older than the cities beneath it, shadows that predate law, language, and civilization itself. In these shadows, the human mind finds both fear and fascination. The moon, patient and constant, continues to inspire reflection, creativity, and caution. Its influence is no longer overt, but it endures, embedded in memory, art, and the subconscious rhythms that govern thought and emotion. And so, the moon continues to watch. It watches over those who walk cautiously and those who dare recklessly. It watches over the faithful, the curious, and the solitary. It witnesses the ordinary and the extraordinary, the rational and the irrational. Its gaze is silent, impartial, and eternal. In that gaze, humanity is reminded of its own fragility and resilience, its capacity for imagination, fear, and wonder. The night sky, despite our knowledge and progress, remains a place where the ancient and modern converge, where the past lingers in the present, and where the moon holds its enduring dominion, not over bodies or souls, but over memory, myth, and the quiet heart of human imagination. In the end, the moon is less a celestial body than a mirror of ourselves. It watches as it has always watched, patiently, silently, indifferent to our understanding yet intimately entwined with our perception. Beneath its light, civilization is revealed as delicate, imagination as enduring, and fear as perennial. The night, despite its modern trappings, is never empty. It carries with it the echoes of centuries, the shadows of memory, and the enduring presence of what still watches us. And in that silver glow we find not only the moon, but ourselves, fragile, eternal, and quietly observed.